U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Now, U.S. senators are asking, did he lie to get his job? Did he lie about his meetings with Russian officials? Well, the answer today from Mr. Sessions, an emphatic no. Tonight, another top name from President Trump's inner circle, under oath, his character under fire. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
I have been called a surrogate a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. I do not have any recollection of meeting or talking to the Russian ambassador or any other Russian officials. I recuse myself from any investigation into the campaign for president, but I did not recuse myself from defending my honor against scurrilous and false allegations.
Also on the show tonight, eating humble pie, her own recipe. British Prime Minister Theresa May is suddenly stomaching much more than she ever imagined a snap election could dish out. That story coming up in about 7 minutes. We begin the day exactly as we began the day 1 week ago, inside the U.S. Congress, watching and listening to a Washington power player explain himself. Now, last Tuesday, it was former FBI Director James Comey who accused President Trump of lying and of trying to put the brakes on a criminal investigation. Mr. Comey's comments hit at the heart of the Oval Office. And his comments also targeted men who allegedly walked out of the Oval Office when they should have stayed to witness what the president was about to say. One of those men was Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Today, as fate and the calendar would have it, Mr. Sessions is on Capitol Hill and he's under oath. Now, sitting across from him are senators who have questioned him before, namely during his nomination hearing, his confirmation hearing earlier this year. And some of those senators suspect that the last time they posed questions to Mr. Sessions, he gave them something quite different from the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sessions began his testimony today vehemently refuting any claims that he had anything to do with Russian officials and that he never lied to Congress about anything.
I was your colleague in this body for 20 years, at least some of you, and and the suggestion that I participated in any collusion, that I was aware of any collusion with the Russian government to hurt this country, which I have served with honor for 35 years, or to undermine the integrity of our democratic process, is an appalling and detestable lie.
Yeah, a very emotional Attorney General there. I want to pull in now Renato Mariotti from Chicago. He is a partner at the law firm Thompson Coburn and a former federal prosecutor with experience prosecuting obstruction of justice cases. It's good to have you on the day. You know, we heard an unequivocal rejection from Mr. Sessions of all of the accusations that are floating around his name. Is there any reason to doubt the credibility and the honesty of Mr. Sessions' testimony?
What I would say is that Mr. Sessions and Mr. Comey at times have conflicting accounts. It'll be up to ultimately the members of the House and Senate to judge their credibility, and they'll look at a lot of factors. What I would say is that Mr. Comey's long experience in law enforcement and his contemporaneous notes would assist in that testimony, although today we heard for the first time a few moments ago that Mr. Sessions' chief of staff was present for a meeting that Mr. Comey had with Mr. Sessions. So presumably there was another witness to at least one of those meetings, and it'll be interesting to hear what the chief of staff has to say.
And what would you say then? Are we left at the end of the day after this testimony with Comey's word against Sessions' word? Is that what we've got? He said, he said?
There's an element of that. but also you would have to look at the surrounding facts and circumstances. So, for example, I imagine that Bob Mueller, the special counsel, and his staff will interview the people who were asked to leave the room before the president spoke with Mr. Comey. He'll also ask for communications that Mr. Comey had with others. For example, communications that he had with the leadership of the FBI right after the meeting, email communications, etc. So there may be more evidence out there, but as for what we know publicly, all we're hearing are conflicting accounts. We've heard Mr. Comey say one thing, Mr. Sessions say another. The president, both through his attorney and in tweets, has said something different. And ultimately, Mr. Mueller is going to have to sort this out over many months and potentially, years.
Mr. Mariani, I'd like for you to take a listen to an exchange between U.S. Senator Franken and Mr. Sessions from Mr. Sessions' confirmation hearing earlier this year. Now, this is when Mr. Sessions allegedly lied about his contacts with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. Take a listen.
If there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Now, we know that reports emerged later claiming that Sessions had two meetings with the Russian ambassador during the campaign last year, and it's suspected that in closed talks last week that Mr. Comey told senators of a possible third meeting. Now, to the outside observer, this looks like a person who lied to Congress under oath and was then confirmed as Attorney General. Is it that black and white?
It's not that black and white, because you actually have to prove that he knowingly and willfully made that false statement. And so the question is, now I think Attorney General Sessions testified today that he did come into contact potentially, for example, with the Russian ambassador, but it wasn't a planned meeting, or it wasn't in his role as a surrogate, or it was something that he forgot at the time. So if he forgot about the meeting, then it wasn't a knowing false statement. These are the sort of things that make it difficult in the United States to obtain a criminal conviction. Here, I think that they are things that would potentially, make it difficult for Mr. Mueller to prosecute Mr. Sessions. One thing I would say is Mr. Sessions' willingness to speak on these topics suggests to me that he's not concerned about a potential prosecution. I thought that was one of the most surprising things from his testimony today.
And, someone looking at this case from outside obviously has the question, so where is it leading us? Is it leading us eventually to that inevitable impeachment proceeding against U.S. President Donald Trump? What you, as a former federal prosecutor, what's your take on that? Are we closer today to a possible impeachment proceeding than we were a week ago?
Well, we are certainly closer than we were prior to Mr. Comey's testimony. I think his testimony certainly provided significant evidence that I'm sure Mr. Mueller and his team will look at. No one knows what the end result of this is going to be, whether or not there is going to be an impeachment proceeding. But I think what we can be sure of is that Mr. Mueller is going to conduct a long investigation, interview many witnesses, obtain many documents, and ultimately issue a report to Congress. And that report may recommend impeachment. It may not. He may bring charges against other people first, or recommend that charges be brought at that time. But at the very least, there will be a very serious reckoning for some people at the end of that investigation.
If, of course, Mr. Mueller keeps his job, there are rumors circulating around Washington that the U.S. president has considered or has entertained the idea of firing Mr. Mueller. Can a U.S. president fire a special counsel, a special prosecutor?
There is some legal debate about this, but what I would say the majority opinion is that Mr. Trump would be is constrained by statute, and it would actually have to be a deputy attorney general, in this case acting attorney general Rosenstein, who would have to make the firing himself, and he would have to do so for good cause. And now that doesn't mean that the president couldn't, require Mr. Rosenstein to do this and then fire Mr. Rosenstein if he refused. But if that happened, it would be a repeat of what happened in the 1970s when Richard Nixon fired people until he found someone who was willing to dismiss the special prosecutor back then, Leon Jaworski, which hastened his downfall at that time.
All right, a lot to digest here. We certainly appreciate your insights. Mr. Renato Mariotti from Chicago, a former federal prosecutor, helping us understand what those U.S. senators are having to digest tonight. Mr. Mariotti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being on the day.